Hi, I'm Ben, and welcome to my book corner. Today we're taking a look at The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling. This is a horror and sci-fi book that was released back in 2019 and comes in at a little over 400 pages. We will start by looking at the basics on the story, dig a little bit into the world building and the characters, have a look at some of the positives and negatives of this title, and then at the end we'll jump into my tier rating for it. So let's just jump straight in. So the story follows, and I apologise for once again butchering your name, Gyre Price, who has lied her way into taking part in a mapping expedition for mineral deposits below the crust of the world that she lives on, expecting her biggest problems to be collapsed caves and gear malfunctions. However, due to the risk, there is a high paycheck for this. The longer, however, that she is under the ground, the more she realises that first of all, she has a support person on the other end of the radio, as this is a lone expedition and it's just the one person rather than the team. And it also becomes clear that the actual reasons for this are not in fact looking for ore, but more trying to find out what happened to some other miners that disappeared 30 years ago, and there's a very personal investment here. What follows is a breakdown of trust and an interesting look at how the human mind copes when you're on your own in a really restricted environment, where the only person that you've got to communicate with is firstly not there, and secondly you don't trust what they say. The other thing to say about this as well is that Gyre herself did lie to get in, and it was also realised by the person who set up the expedition, who is called M. The further and further into the mine the story goes, the more inconsistent things come, and you start having a situation where the stresses and strains involved really begin to show on Gyre. The key thing I will say about this book is based on the title and the imagery on the front cover, I was under the impression that this would actually have some sort of monster element to this, and it doesn't. And I think that's a good thing. It's very, very focused on the one person's plight moving through this environment and the connection that that person makes with M, and for that it's pretty good. So in terms of the world building, the story takes place at some point in the future, although that's not specified, and this is a mining world, and it's alluded to several times within the text that this feels very much like a corporate dystopia, where places like this tend to have low wages, unsafe working practices, and it's the sort of place that eventually corporations will just abandon once they've been bled dry. But it's also made clear that there are other types of world out there, like garden worlds, which is what Gyre is saving up money for, so she can go and look for her mother, who disappeared years earlier. The other thing that's quite good about this is the look at how technology works, although it's a little bit inconsistent in some places, but that can be explained away by the dystopian nature of the setting. The way that the suit, you have to actually have it plugged physically into you, you actually have to have surgery so it can use its substance pods, and the various different things that the suit can do actually do quite a bit to inform how this world works, and also in a way how expendable people are in it, which is in itself quite horrifying. There's also various allusions in here to previous expeditions, which that gets gradually uncovered over time, which helps build the world from the point of view of M in particular, and Gyre as well. And you also have the ever-present threat of one of the local creatures, which is called a tunneler, which it's not totally made clear what attracts them, just that the fact that heat and sound in particular, and they are completely deadly if they're come across. Some decent stuff here. So this is told entirely from the point of view of Gyre Price, and you spend the entire book with her, and you get to see her reactions and interactions with her handler, for want of a better word, M. And the really interesting thing about this is, first of all, they have actually quite similar goals in terms of why one's gone on the expedition and why one's paying for it, although that's not clear at the outset. And the lack of trust between the two quickly sort of gets worse as the book goes on, leading to, on both parts, some errors of judgment, some outbursts. You do get quite a lot of paranoia and hallucinations because of the high stress environment, almost like cabin fever in many regards. And then by the end of the book, Em actually comes down to save Gyre, because at this point she's lost multiple expeditions looking for what they're looking for down here. And it's sort of alluded to that they have, by the end of the book, a very love-hate relationship. People who don't like slow-moving stories might have some issues with this, as there is quite a lot of repetitive work within the interactions, quite a lot of backbiting, quite a lot of hypocrisy in many ways from Gyre's point of view, when you consider the fact that she's accusing Em of being untrustworthy, where she has actually lied to get the place in the first place. But on the flip side, Em realises that she's lied, so bit of tit for tat there. But overall, the most interesting thing here is the slow descent into hallucinations and paranoia, that the pure stress of loneliness in the situation and the dead bodies and the dangers that she's facing as on Gyre. And by the end, she's properly been through the ringer, and it's really, really well done. From that point of view, this is a decent, really well told, focused psychological horror. So the positives about this book are almost entirely around the psychological effects on the characters, and also how claustrophobic and dangerous the environment is. The focus on the environment and environmental hazards and how important the resupply drops within the cave system is really driven home in here, especially when you hit points where some of those actual sections have been looted, or someone hasn't actually died as expected, so they've still been using the various canisters and supplies. Also, you've got the paranoia and the sort of spiral, which is exceptionally well done. The very gradual build up to hitting certain points of hallucinations and thinking they're seeing people down there, as well as some of the environmental hazards. For example, about halfway through the book, I think it is, the Gyre ends up walking through a load of mushrooms that give off spores, and because she's not quite thinking straight because she's so tired, and obviously there's been various occurrences in the story where the sort of drugs have been administered to try and keep her level, she ends up going to the water and refiltering her water out, and that fetches the spores into a system, which leaves a situation where basically her handler M has to pump her with drugs just so she can make her better, and that the lack of judgment and stuff like that is really, really well done. The general world building as well, although very subtle, is made clear that this is a really unpleasant planet to live on because of the nature of it, and that's really well done as well. I think the characters are really good. You could argue there's some repetitiveness there in the banter between the two, but you really get the sense of these two have only got each other at this moment in time, and it's a high pressure situation for both for different reasons. On to the negatives, and there's not a huge amount of negative here. One thing I would say is this is a very slow burn book by nature. I'm saying that I breezed through this in a little over a day, but if you're not a fan of slow builds, then this is probably not a book for you. As I already touched on as well, there's some repetitive nature in the interactions. It sometimes feels like the characters don't progress with each other as much as you'd like them to. And also, occasionally some of the conflict almost feels forced, but overall, that's not really an issue for me. The only other thing is, in a sense of expectation, I kind of initially got a vibe of the Doctor Who episode in the library in the forest with the Vashta Narada, based on the cover of the book and the title and some little bits and pieces in the description. And there's nothing like that here. So what I will say is make sure you're going into this knowing that this realistically is a psychological and environmental horror, rather than something that has monsters or anything like that in there. So, with all that being said, I actually really enjoyed this book. I thought the slow build and the paranoia was done really well, and as I've already said multiple times on the channel, I like the really tight character focused pieces here. There are some issues. The pacing is a bit slow for some, although I thought it worked perfectly well to allow the gradual ramp up for the end of the story when everything just nearly fell apart and ended in complete disaster. For me, this goes quite strongly into B tier. It's not going to be a book for everyone, this. I personally liked it. I'd quite like to read more stuff from Starling in the future. But what I would like to know is, have you read this book and what did you think about it? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time.